Welcome to Hidden Wounds. My name is Henry Sinclair, and at 62 years of age, I have come to understand that the deepest cuts are not inflicted by blades. They are dealt with a smile and a dismissive laugh. The offices of Peterson and Associates, paneled in dark, imposing cherry wood, carried the scent of aged leather and generational wealth. It was the sort of establishment where fortunes were carved up and family bonds were severed with the mere scratch of a pen on paper. I was seated in a stiff, uncomfortable chair on the other side of Mr. Peterson's colossal desk. My hands were clasped in my lap, and the weak afternoon sun, struggling through the thick velvet curtains, caught the face of my old watch. My son, Julian, sat next to me. At 38 years old, he was already running the numbers on his inheritance, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. His wife, Veronica, was perched on the very edge of her seat, like a carrion bird awaiting a feast. Her perfectly lacquered nails tapped a restless rhythm against her expensive leather handbag. "Before we proceed, Mr. Fixdine," Peterson began, carefully adjusting his thin, wire-rimmed spectacles, "I want to extend my deepest condolences once more, Mr. Sinclair. Your wife was an extraordinary woman." "Thank you," I managed to say, my voice a quiet rasp. Yet it remained steady, despite the grief that felt like a physical pressure on my chest. Isabella had been gone for 3 weeks, and the world still felt tilted on its axis without her presence. "Now then," Peterson resumed, opening the substantial leather-bound document. "The last will and testament of Isabella Sinclair, dated June 20, of this year." I watched as Julian leaned forward, a current of eagerness running through him. For his entire adult life, he had awaited this very moment, the moment his mother's vast empire would finally become his personal domain. "To my son, Julian Sinclair," Peterson read aloud, "I bequeath Sinclair Industries in its entirety, which includes all subsidiaries, corporate holdings, and associated assets. The current valuation is north of $22 million. A triumphant grin spread across Julian's face. Veronica actually let out a small, delighted clap, like a child on Christmas morning. A cold, heavy sensation began to settle in the pit of my stomach. "Congratulations, my love," Veronica cooed, her mind already redecorating their life. "We are going to have the most incredible life." Peterson cleared his throat, his eyes returning to the will. "And to my cherished husband, Henry Sinclair, my constant partner and companion for 35 years. Here it comes," I thought. The house, perhaps a portion of the savings enough for a comfortable, quiet retirement. I leave my old wooden box from the study, along with all of its contents. The silence that fell over the office was absolute, thick, and suffocating. Julian's smile faltered, a flicker of confusion clouding his features. Veronica's expression morphed from sheer delight into something bordering on utter disgust. "That's all?" Veronica blurted out, her voice sharp and incredulous. "A wooden box?" Mr. Peterson glanced at the will one more time. "Yes, that appears to be the full extent of the bequest to Mr. Sinclair." Veronica turned her gaze on me, and I could see a vile, ugly sentiment bloom in her eyes. "Well," she said, her voice dripping with a sickly, false sweetness, "I guess you were just the useless old baggage after all." The words struck me with the force of a physical blow. Julian said nothing. He didn't rush to my defense. He didn't even have the decency to look uncomfortable. He was far too absorbed in the glow of his newfound riches to be bothered with his father's humiliation. "The box is in the study at the estate," Peterson stated, seemingly oblivious to the casual cruelty that had just been displayed. "You can retrieve it whenever you're ready." I rose from my chair slowly, my legs feeling unsteady beneath me. "Thank you, Mr. Peterson. I believe I'll collect it today." Veronica's laughter echoed behind me as I walked out of the office, a sound that was bright, mocking, and victorious. "Don't you worry, Henry," she called out after me. "We'll find you a lovely room at Golden Meadows. It's a wonderful retirement community." I walked through the parking garage in a daze, my old cufflinks catching the dim light with each step. 35 years of marriage, of building a life and a business side by side with my wife, and all I seemingly had to show for it was an old wooden box. The drive home felt endless. The estate, my home for over 3 decades, looked alien to me now. It belonged to Julian and Veronica, along with every other brick and board that Isabella and I had laid together. I found the box right where it had always been, resting on Isabella's desk in her study. It was a simple, unassuming thing, carved from dark walnut, roughly the size of a shoebox. It had a small brass clasp that had been broken for years. I carried it into the library and sat in my favorite armchair by the window, the same one where Isabella would read to me in the evenings. My hands trembled slightly as I lifted the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of faded blue velvet, were stacks of papers, official legal documents, share certificates, and transfer deeds. And tucked beneath them all was a letter, written in Isabella's elegant, familiar script. "My dearest Henry," it began, "if you are reading this, then the will has been read, and you now know what Julian has inherited. What he does not know, what no one knows, is that you are the one who holds the true power. The documents contained in this box are proof that you are the majority shareholder of Sinclair Industries, 51%, transferred to you incrementally over the last 10 years through a series of private, untraceable transactions. Julian owns the company in name, but you, my love, control its destiny. I have watched our son grow into a man I barely recognize. I have seen him treat you with a casual disregard that shatters my heart. I watched as Veronica systematically poisoned him against the man who raised him with unconditional love. They will ridicule you for this box, my love. They will believe I gave you a pittance while I handed him an empire. Let them believe it. Let them celebrate. Let them begin to map out their new lives. And then, when you are ready, you will show them who truly holds the leash. Use this power as you deem fit. I trust your wisdom completely. Oh, my love, Isabella." I must have read the letter 3 times before the weight of her words fully registered. Then I examined the share certificates, dozens of them, each one a legal transfer of a piece of Sinclair Industries into my name. The dates spanned a full decade, a series of small, quiet transactions that would have been invisible to anyone not specifically searching for them. Isabella had been orchestrating this for 10 years. I thought about Veronica's cutting words. "I guess you were just the useless old baggage after all." I pictured Julian's smug, self-satisfied grin as he laid claim to his inheritance. I thought about the retirement home they had so thoughtfully picked out for me. For the first time since Isabella's funeral, a slow smile spread across my face. Let them enjoy their hollow victory. Let them make their grand plans. Let them write off the old man with his wooden box. They had absolutely no idea what was about to happen. "Let the games begin," I whispered to Isabella's portrait hanging on the wall. "And may God have mercy on their souls, because I certainly will not." The following morning's newspaper made my stomach turn. There, splashed across the front page of the business section, was a large photograph of Julian, his arm around Veronica, raising a champagne flute in a toast. The headline blared, "New generation takes the helm. Julian Sinclair inherits multi-million-dollar empire." I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Isabella and I had shared breakfast every morning for 35 years, and I read every gut-wrenching word. The article portrayed Julian as a visionary, a dynamic leader poised to guide his mother's company into a bold new era. There was even a quote from Veronica. "We are so thrilled to honor Isabella's legacy while forging a new and innovative path forward." Honor her legacy. The sheer audacity of it made my hands tremble with a cold rage. Just then, my phone buzzed. It was a text message from Veronica. "Packing up the master bedroom today? We'll need you out by Friday. Found you a lovely single room at Golden Meadows. You'll be so much happier there." I stared at the cheerful red heart emoji, marveling at the fact that she had no concept of how close she was dancing to the edge of a cliff. That afternoon, I drove past the Sinclair Industries headquarters, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that Isabella had designed herself when we moved the company out of its humble beginnings in a warehouse district. News vans dotted the parking lot, and reporters were interviewing employees about the leadership transition. I parked my car across the street and watched in my rearview mirror as Julian emerged from the building, Veronica clinging to his arm like a piece of expensive decorative jewelry. They posed for the cameras, all beaming smiles and confident gestures. Julian was wearing one of his mother's ties, Isabella's favorite, a navy blue silk with small embroidered compass roses that I had given her for our 20th anniversary. The sight of it twisted something cold and sharp inside my chest. That evening, I placed a call to my old friend Brenda, who was still working in the accounting department at Sinclair Industries. "Henry, honey," she said, her voice filled with a genuine sympathy. "I heard about the will. I'm just so sorry." We were all shocked by how by how she chose to divide things. "It's all right, Brenda," I said, adjusting the watch on my wrist. Isabella knew exactly what she was doing. "Julian had HR circulate a memo this afternoon," she went on, "all about new leadership and exciting changes. He's planning a complete renovation of the executive floor, wants to replace all of Isabella's antique furniture with cold, contemporary pieces. Veronica has been in his office all day, chattering about new paint swatches and color palettes." I closed my eyes, picturing Veronica's perfectly manicured hands tearing apart the office Isabella had so lovingly curated with family photos and cherished heirlooms. "Has he made any significant business decisions yet?" I asked. "Not yet. But there's a lot of talk about expanding into the European markets. Julian keeps talking about his plans to modernize and globalize, whatever that's supposed to mean." After I hung up the phone, I sat in Isabella's study with the wooden box open on the desk beside me, poring over the share certificates and legal documents. Isabella had been meticulous. Every single transfer was perfectly documented, notarized, and filed with the correct regulatory bodies. I owned 51% of Sinclair Industries, but that ownership was buried within a complex labyrinth of holding companies and trusts. It would take a team of forensic accountants months to unravel it. My phone rang at precisely 9 o'clock. Julian's name flashed on the screen. "Hi, son," I answered, my voice warm and fatherly. "Dad," he said, his tone strained. "We need to talk." "Of course. Is something wrong?" "I'm trying to finalize the Westgate project. You remember, the big commercial real estate deal Mom was working on before she passed. But the lawyers are saying there's some kind of issue with the company's ownership structure." I smiled in the darkness of the study. "What sort of issue?" "They keep requesting additional documentation. Something about needing majority shareholder approval for any contract valued over $5 million. It makes no sense. Mom left the company to me." "How peculiar," I murmured. "Have you spoken with the corporate attorneys?" "They're being strange too. They keep saying they need to verify the current ownership records before they can advise me on anything. It's like they don't trust me to run my own company." I could hear the frustration mounting in his voice, the first small crack appearing in his new confident persona. "I'm sure it's just bureaucratic red tape," I said in a soothing voice. These things can take time to iron out after someone passes away. Yeah, maybe you're right. He paused. So, how are you doing? Veronica mentioned she found you a nice place at that retirement community. She's very thoughtful, I said, each word carefully chosen. Good, good. Well, I should go. Big day tomorrow. After he hung up, I sat in the quiet study and allowed myself a brief moment of satisfaction. The first seeds of confusion had been sown. Very soon, Julian would learn that there is a vast difference between inheriting a company and controlling one. I picked up Isabella's photograph from the desk, my fingers tracing the outline of the silver frame. Phase 1 is complete, my love, I whispered. Tomorrow, we begin Phase 2. The boardroom at Sinclair Industries had always been my favorite room in the entire building. Isabella had designed it herself. It featured a rich mahogany table, leather armchairs that cost more than most people's first cars, and an entire wall of floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the Chicago skyline. It was a room that exuded power and commanded respect. I hadn't set foot in this room in 6 months, not since Isabella's last board meeting before she received her diagnosis. As I walked in that Tuesday morning, carrying my old leather briefcase and the unassuming wooden box, I felt like a king returning to reclaim his throne. The board members were visibly surprised to see me. A few offered me awkward, mumbled condolences. Others just gave me a polite nod. Julian was seated at the head of the table, Isabella's chair, with Veronica sitting beside him in a seat that had never been intended for a spouse. "Dad," Julian said, his voice carefully devoid of emotion, "I wasn't expecting to see you here. It's the monthly board meeting," I replied simply, taking a seat at the opposite end of the long table. I wouldn't miss it. Veronica leaned over and whispered something in Julian's ear. I managed to catch the words senile and embarrassing before she straightened up, a plastic smile plastered on her face. "Mr. Sinclair," said Mark Jennings, the corporate attorney. "Perhaps it would be for the best if—" "I have every right to be here," I interrupted, my voice still quiet, but now edged with steel. "In fact, I have more right to be here than anyone else in this room." Julian's face tightened. "Dad, I appreciate that you want to remain involved, but I'm the CEO now. These meetings cover complex business matters that I've been handling for 30 years while you were busy playing video games and getting drunk at college fraternity parties." I finished for him. The room fell into a stunned silence. Veronica's mouth dropped open in shock. In 38 years, I had never once spoken to Julian with such sharpness in public. "Now," I continued, opening the wooden box with deliberate, unhurried care, "let's discuss the Westgate project." "The Westgate project is my decision," Julian said, his voice rising in defiance. "The board doesn't need to—" "Actually," I interjected, pulling a manila folder from the box, "any contract exceeding $5 million requires the approval of the majority shareholder." I slid the folder down the polished surface of the table to Mark Jennings. "I believe you'll find this to be very interesting reading." Jennings opened the folder, and I watched his expression shift as he scanned the documents inside. His eyes widened, then narrowed as he began to process the implications. "What is that?" Julian demanded. "Share certificates," I said calmly, straightening my tie. 51% of Sinclair Industries, transferred to my name over the past decade through a series of private transactions. The silence that ensued was absolute. I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning, the distant sounds of city traffic from the street below, and the quickening breath of a daughter-in-law who had just realized her entire world was beginning to crumble. "That's impossible," Julian whispered, his voice barely audible. "Mark," I asked the attorney, "are the documents authentic?" Jennings was still poring over the papers, his legal mind racing. They appeared to be entirely legitimate, properly notarized, filed with all the appropriate agencies. Mr. Sinclair, if these documents are accurate, then you are the majority owner of this company. Veronica made a sound like a wounded animal. No, this can't be happening. Julian owns the company. The will gave Julian the company, I said, my voice as hard as diamond. It did not give him control of it. I stood up slowly, and every pair of eyes in the room followed my movement. The Westgate project is hereby cancelled. I do not approve of the terms. You can't do this. Julian's voice cracked like an adolescent's. This is my company. No, son, I said, walking around the table towards him. This is my company. You are merely an employee, and employees do not get to overrule the majority shareholder. I reached Isabella's chair, Julian's chair, and I waited. For a tense moment, I thought he might actually refuse to move. Then, slowly, shamefully, he stood up and stepped away. I settled into the chair that had always been mine by right, if not by title. The leather was still warm. Now then, I said, looking around the table at the sea of stunned faces, let's discuss the real business at hand. Veronica tried to speak, her voice trembling with rage. You can't. I can do whatever I want. I cut her off. I own 51% of this company. I am the majority shareholder, the controlling interest, and the final authority on all major decisions. I smiled, and it was a sharp, dangerous thing. I am, in effect, everyone's boss. Julian sank into the chair Veronica had just vacated, his face ashen with shock. How long have you known? Your mother began transferring shares to me 10 years ago, I told him. I have been aware of every transaction as it occurred. Why didn't you say anything? I looked at my son, this man I had raised, loved, and sacrificed for, and I let him see the unvarnished truth in my eyes. Because I wanted to see who you truly were when you believed you held all the power. The unspoken answer hung in the air like a thick fog. Julian couldn't meet my gaze. He knew, and everyone else in that room knew, exactly what kind of man his recent behavior had revealed him to be. This meeting is adjourned, I said, my voice final. Mark, I'll need to meet with you tomorrow morning to discuss corporate restructuring. Everyone else? I suggest you update your resumes. There are going to be some changes around here. As the board members filed out of the room in a state of shocked silence, Veronica remained in her chair, glaring at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated hatred. You won't get away with this, she hissed. I stood up, smoothing the front of my suit jacket with hands that were as steady as stone. My dear Veronica, I said, my voice as sweet as honey, I already have. The private investigator I hired, Marcus Vance, was worth every single penny of his substantial fee. Within 2 weeks, he had delivered a thick manila envelope to my office that contained enough compromising material to completely incinerate Veronica's life several times over. I sat in my new corner office, the CEO's office that had once been Isabella's, and I spread the photographs across my mahogany desk like a deck of tarot cards, each one predicting a very dark and imminent future. There was Veronica, with Keith Anderson, Julian's best friend and business partner, at the Ritz-Carlton downtown. Veronica, with Keith, at a secluded cabin up in the mountains. Veronica with Keith at various restaurants, hotels, and in the front seat of his Mercedes, her hand resting possessively on his thigh. But the photographs were merely the appetizer. The main course was found within the financial records. For the past 3 years, Veronica had been systematically embezzling funds from Sinclair Industries. She had created fictitious vendor accounts, approved wildly inflated expense reports, and diverted company payments into personal bank accounts she had kept hidden from Julian. The total was approaching $250,000. "You greedy little snake," I murmured, studying a bank statement that showed a $40,000 deposit on the very same day she had claimed a business lunch had cost the company $1,500. My intercom buzzed. "Mr. Sinclair, your son is here to see you. Send him in." Julian entered my office looking haggard and worn. He had lost weight in the past month, and dark circles had formed under his eyes. The immense stress of discovering that he was essentially powerless over his own inheritance was clearly taking its toll. "We need to talk," he said, slumping into the chair across from my desk. About this situation, about the company, about what you want from me." I leaned back in my leather chair, studying my son with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a particularly disappointing specimen. "What I want," I said slowly, "is for you to understand that actions have consequences. I get it, okay? I get it. You're angry about the will reading, about what Veronica said, but this is destroying my marriage." "Is it?" I asked, feigning concern. "How unfortunate. She barely speaks to me anymore. She says I'm weak, that I should be fighting you for control of the company. But I don't know how. I don't understand how Mom could have done this to me." I opened a drawer in my desk and removed the envelope from Marcus Vance. "Speaking of your wife, there's something you ought to see." I slid the first photograph across the polished surface of the desk. It showed Veronica and Keith locked in a passionate kiss in the parking lot of a seedy motel. I wouldn't let my dog sleep in. Julian's face went pale. "What? Where did you get this?" "There are more." I laid out the rest of the photographs like I was dealing a hand of poker. "Quite a lot more, in fact." Julian's hands trembled as he picked up each image. I watched his expression cycle through shock, denial, rage, and finally, a broken and defeated understanding. "How long?" he whispered. 3 years, according to my investigator. 3 years, he repeated, as if testing the weight of the words. "We've been married for 5 years. She's been cheating on me for more than half of our marriage." "It gets worse?" I said, removing the financial documents from the envelope. "She's also been stealing from the company." I showed him the bank records, the falsified invoices, the clear and undeniable trail of theft that led directly back to his beloved wife. With each new piece of evidence, Julian seemed to shrink further into himself. $250,000, I stated, after he had reviewed everything. "That's what your wife has stolen from the company your mother built from the ground up." Julian set the papers down with trembling hands. "What do you want me to do?" "Nothing," I said, returning the documents to their envelope. "I will handle everything." "What does that mean?" I smiled. And this time, there was no warmth in it at all. "Tonight is the annual Children's Hospital Charity Gala at the St. Regis Hotel. Half of Chicago's business community will be in attendance. So Veronica will be there too. And she is going to have a very, very educational evening." That night, I dressed with the meticulous care of a general preparing for a decisive battle. My black tuxedo was elegant and understated. My late wife's pearl cufflinks caught the light perfectly, and my silver hair was styled with a precision that had taken my barber an hour to achieve. The grand ballroom of the St. Regis glittered with the light of crystal chandeliers and the sparkle of Chicago's social elite. I made my entrance alone, politely declining the arm of a young attendant who offered to escort me to my table. Veronica was already there, a stunning vision in a red gown that likely cost more than the average person's monthly mortgage payment. She was holding court at a table near the front of the room, regaling Julian's business associates with animated stories about their recent vacation to Paris. I took my seat at the head table, the one reserved for major donors and community leaders, and I waited for the evening's program to commence. The dinner was superb, the speeches were appropriately dull, and the charity auction raised an impressive sum for the hospital. Then, during the coffee and dessert service, I stood up and walked to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the ballroom sound system, "if I could have your attention for just a moment." The chatter gradually died down as 500 pairs of eyes turned in my direction. I could see Veronica at her table, looking confused and slightly irritated by the interruption. Many of you knew my late wife, Isabella Sinclair. She believed deeply in honesty, integrity, and the importance of community. I paused, allowing my words to hang in the air. She also believed that when someone betrays your trust, there must be consequences. Veronica's face had gone pale. She was staring at me now with the wide-eyed terror of a rabbit that has just realized it's in the presence of a wolf. "Tonight," I continued, "I want to share with you some photographs that I think you will find very interesting." The large screens positioned around the ballroom suddenly lit up with the first image. Veronica and Keith in a passionate embrace outside the cheap motel. A wave of gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. "This is my daughter-in-law, Veronica Sinclair, with my son's business partner and best friend, Keith Anderson." More photographs flashed across the screens. Veronica screamed an actual, piercing scream and tried to bolt from the room, but the exit doors had been quietly secured by security guards I had hired for the occasion. "And now," I continued, my voice never wavering, "let's take a look at some financial records." The screens shifted to display bank statements, forged invoices, and a clear, damning trail of embezzlement stretching back 3 years. The crowd was completely silent now, utterly captivated by the unfolding drama. Veronica was sobbing hysterically. Julian was staring at the screens in abject horror, and Keith Anderson was nowhere to be found. He had slipped out through a kitchen exit at the first sign of trouble. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice cutting through Veronica's pathetic wails, "let this be a lesson to all of us. When you mock someone in their most vulnerable moment, when you call them useless baggage, when you think you can steal and cheat and lie without consequence." I smiled, and it was both beautiful and terrible. "Well, sometimes that person has more power than you ever realized." I walked down from the podium and straight to Veronica, who had collapsed into her chair, mascara streaming down her face in black rivulets. "You called me useless baggage," I said, my voice so quiet that only she could hear it. "But nothing is more useless or ugly than the desperation I see on your face right now." I turned and walked out of the ballroom, leaving behind the cacophony of whispers, the stares, and the smoldering wreckage of my daughter-in-law's reputation. Justice, it turned out, tasted even sweeter than I had ever imagined. Julian appeared at my office door 3 days after the charity gala, looking like a man who hadn't slept since the dawn of time. His expensive suit was rumpled, his normally impeccable hair was a disheveled mess, and a tremor in his hand spoke of too much alcohol and not enough food. "Dad," he said, hovering in the doorway as if he were afraid to step inside. "Can we talk?" I looked up from the quarterly reports. I was reviewing the real reports, not the sanitized versions Veronica had been fabricating to conceal her theft. "Of course. Sit down." He collapsed into the chair opposite my desk, and I could smell the stale scent of whiskey on his breath, even though it was only 10 o'clock in the morning. "The whole city is talking about it," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "The photographs, the embezzlement, everything. I can't show my face anywhere. Imagine how I felt walking out of that lawyer's office. After Veronica called me useless baggage, I replied, not looking up from my paperwork. I never said anything. You laughed, I interrupted, finally meeting his gaze. You sat there and you laughed while your wife humiliated the man who raised you. Julian's face crumpled. I know, and I'm sorry. I am so sorry, Dad. Sorry doesn't pay back the $250,000 your wife stole from this company. Sorry doesn't undo the damage she's done to our family's reputation. What do you want from me? His voice cracked. Just tell me what you want, and I'll do it. I set down my pen and studied my son, this broken man who had inherited an empire and controlled nothing. A month ago, he had been planning my banishment to a retirement home. Now, he was begging for my mercy. I want you to understand what you have lost, I said quietly. Lost? I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a thick legal document. This is your termination agreement. You are being removed from all positions within Sinclair Industries, effective immediately. The color drained from his face. You can't fire me. I'm the owner. You are an employee who owns 49% of a company that I control. I corrected him. And as of this moment, you are unemployed. But the business, everything Mom built, everything your mother and I built, I corrected him again. You seem to forget that I was there from the very beginning. I kept the books, I managed the payroll, I negotiated the contracts while your mother focused on the design and innovation side. This company exists because of both of us, not just her. Julian leaned forward, his voice thick with desperation. Dad, please. I have debts, obligations, the mortgage payment, the car notes, Veronica's credit cards. Veronica's problem now. I assume she'll be needing that money for her legal fees. Legal fees? The district attorney is taking a great interest in her embezzlement activities. Apparently, stealing that much money from a corporation is considered a major felony. Jonathan buried his face in his hands. This is destroying me. Good, I said, and I meant it. Sometimes, destruction is a necessary precursor to reconstruction. He looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. I don't understand how this happened. How did everything go so wrong, so fast? I leaned back in my chair, adjusting my cufflinks with deliberate care. Your mother left you a company, Julian, but she also left you a test. It was a chance for you to prove what kind of man you really were when you thought no one was watching, when you thought you held all the power. And I failed. Spectacularly, he sighed. So what happens now? I stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the sprawling city skyline. Now, you learn what it means to build something instead of just inheriting it. You learn what it feels like to earn respect instead of simply expecting it. How am I supposed to do that? I don't have any money, any prospects. You have something more valuable than money, I said, turning to face him. You have a name. The Sinclair name still means something in this city, despite your best efforts to tarnish it. What are you saying? I'm saying you have a choice. You can spend the rest of your life wallowing in self-pity and drowning yourself in alcohol, or you can prove that somewhere, deep inside that entitled, arrogant shell, there is a man worth salvaging. Julian wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, a gesture so reminiscent of the little boy he once was that I almost felt a flicker of the old paternal affection. Almost. What would I have to do? He asked. Start from the bottom. Get a job in construction. Learn the business from the ground up. Show me that you understand the value of honest work and earned success. And then we'll see. Maybe, in a few years, you'll have earned the right to be a part of this company again. Or maybe not. He nodded slowly, and for the first time since he'd walked into my office, he looked as though he might actually possess a spine. There's one more thing, I said, returning to my desk. Veronica has been arrested. The FBI raided your house this morning. Julian's face went white. Arrested? Embezzlement, fraud, money laundering. She's being held without bail. I smiled, and it was as sharp as broken glass. I thought you should know. After he left, I sat alone in my office, surrounded by the empire Isabella and I had built together. Through the vast window, I could see the city spread out below me, a city where the Sinclair name once again commanded respect instead of pity. My phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus, my private investigator. Package delivered, target in custody, invoice attached. I deleted the message and returned to my work. Justice, I was learning, required both patience and precision, but the results were absolutely worth the wait. The headline on the morning paper made me smile as I sipped my coffee. Sinclair heiress arrested. Embezzlement. Scandal rocks Chicago business community. Veronica's mugshot dominated the front page of the business section. They hadn't been kind. The harsh fluorescent lighting of the police station had washed out her complexion and highlighted every desperate line around her eyes. The woman who had once mocked me for being useless baggage now looked like a common criminal, which, I supposed, was exactly what she was. My phone had been ringing off the hook all morning, with calls from reporters seeking a comment, but I had instructed my secretary to direct all media inquiries to our corporate communications department. Let them craft their careful, sanitized statements about cooperating with law enforcement and our unwavering commitment to ethical business practices. I preferred to let my actions speak for themselves. The real entertainment came at lunchtime, when I met my friend Brenda at the country club. Every conversation in the dining room came to a halt when I entered, replaced by a flurry of whispers and furtive glances. I nodded graciously to my acquaintances, smiled at the women who had once pitied me for being just a widower, and took my usual table by the window. "My God, Henry," Brenda breathed as she sat down across from me. "The entire city is talking about what happened at the charity gala. And now, with Veronica's arrest, it has been an eventful week." I agreed, adjusting my cufflinks. "I heard the FBI seized her car, her jewelry, even her collection of designer handbags. They're saying she might have stolen as much as $500,000 when you factor in all the fake vendor payments and inflated expenses." "The investigation is ongoing," I said diplomatically. "I am confident the authorities will uncover the full extent of her activities." "And Julian? How is he handling all of this?" I sipped my wine, a lovely Chardonnay that cost more per bottle than some people earned in a day. "Julian is learning some very valuable lessons about consequences." Brenda leaned forward conspiratorially. "Is it true that you fired him?" "Julian no longer works for Sinclair Industries," I confirmed. "It was time for him to explore other opportunities." "But he's your son." "He is a grown man who made his choices," I said firmly. "And now he is living with the consequences of those choices." That afternoon, I received a visit from a Detective Miller of the Financial Crimes Unit. She was younger than I had expected, with intelligent, dark eyes and the kind of methodical patience that suggested she was exceptionally good at her job. "Mr. Sinclair, thank you for meeting with me," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "I know this must be a difficult time." "Difficult for whom?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Well, discovering that your daughter-in-law was embezzling from your company, having your family's private business exposed so publicly," I smiled. "Detective, the only difficult part of this entire situation was watching my company's money disappear while I built the case against the person responsible." Detective Miller raised an eyebrow. "You built the case?" "I hired a private investigator 6 months ago when I first noticed discrepancies in our financial reports. Every piece of evidence you found in Veronica's possession was documented and cataloged long before her arrest. You could have come to us sooner. I could have. I agreed. But I wanted to ensure we had an airtight case. I also wanted to see just how far she would go. And your son? Did he have any knowledge of his wife's activities? I considered the question carefully. Julian is many things, detective, but he is not a criminal. He is weak, entitled, and easily manipulated, but he did not steal from this company. The bank records may show some joint accounts, but those were accounts which Veronica controlled entirely. Julian signed whatever she put in front of him without reading it. He trusted her completely. I paused. That was his mistake, but it was not his crime. After the detective left, I stood at my office window and watched the traffic weaving through the streets below. Somewhere in this city, Veronica was sitting in a jail cell, likely still unable to comprehend how swiftly her world had collapsed. My secretary buzzed in. "Mr. Sinclair, Channel 7 News is here. They're requesting a statement about the embezzlement case. Send them in." The reporter was a sharp-eyed woman in her 30s, followed by a cameraman who immediately began setting up his equipment. "Mr. Sinclair, I'm Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7. Thank you for agreeing to speak with us." I smoothed my tie and made sure my cufflinks were straight. If I was going to be on television, I was going to look impeccable. "Mr. Sinclair, how did you discover that your daughter-in-law was embezzling from your company?" "When my wife passed away, and I became more involved in the day-to-day operations, I noticed some irregularities in our financial reports. As someone who helped build this company from the ground up, I knew what our legitimate expenses should look like." "And you hired a private investigator?" "I wanted to protect this company and its employees. When you suspect financial crimes of this magnitude, you do not handle it casually." "What was your reaction when you learned the extent of Veronica's theft?" I looked directly into the camera lens, my voice steady and clear. "I was disappointed, but not surprised. When people show you who they are through their words and actions, believe them." "Are you referring to something specific?" "At my wife's will reading, when I inherited what appeared to be just an old wooden box, Veronica laughed at me. She called me useless old baggage. It was abundantly clear then what kind of person she was. And now that she's been arrested, she's facing the consequences of her choices." "Actions have consequences," I affirmed, "and no one is above the law." The interview would air on the evening news, and I knew it would be syndicated by other networks. By tomorrow, the entire state would know the story of the widower who turned the tables on the daughter-in-law who had mocked him. That evening, I sat in my study with Isabella's photograph on the desk beside me and poured myself a glass of her favorite whiskey. "Justice served, my love," I whispered to her image. "One down, one to go." Julian's reckoning was still on the horizon, but for now I was content to savor Veronica's spectacular and well-deserved downfall. The wooden box sat open on my desk, its contents having already irrevocably changed the course of 3 lives. Sometimes the most powerful weapons come in the most unassuming packages. The courtroom was packed to capacity on the day of Veronica's sentencing hearing. I sat in the front row, wearing my best navy suit and my late wife's pearl cufflinks. My hands were folded calmly in my lap as I watched my former daughter-in-law's final public humiliation unfold. 6 months had passed since her arrest, and the intervening time had not been kind to her. Gone was the polished, confident socialite who had once mocked me at the will reading. The woman standing before the judge looked haggard and desperate, aged by the relentless stress of legal battles and the grim reality of impending prison time. Her lawyer, a public defender who looked as though he would rather be anywhere else, made a half-hearted plea for leniency. "Your Honor, my client is deeply remorseful for her actions. She is a first-time offender who made a series of poor decisions during a difficult period in her marriage. I nearly laughed out loud. A difficult period in her marriage. As if her 3-year affair and systematic campaign of theft were somehow Julian's fault. The prosecutor, a stern woman in her 40s, clearly wasn't buying it either. Your Honor, the defendant stole nearly $400,000 from Sinclair Industries over a 3-year period. This was not a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a calculated, sustained campaign of theft that betrayed the trust of her family and threatened the livelihoods of dozens of employees. Judge Harrison, a silver-haired man with a well-known intolerance for financial crimes, studied the case file before addressing Veronica directly. Miss Sinclair, you have pleaded guilty to embezzlement, fraud, and money laundering. Before I impose a sentence, do you have anything you would like to say? Veronica's voice, when she finally spoke, was barely a whisper. I know I made terrible mistakes, and I'm sorry for the pain I've caused. She then turned to look at me, her eyes red, rimmed, and pleading. Henry, please. I know we've had our differences, but I'm begging you. Miss Sinclair, the judge interrupted. Please address the court, not the gallery. But I had heard enough. I stood up slowly, my cufflinks catching the courtroom's fluorescent lights. Your Honor, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silent room. May I address the court? Mr. Sinclair, this is highly irregular. I am the victim of this crime, Your Honor. I believe I have the right to make a victim impact statement. Judge Harrison consulted with the clerk, then gave a slight nod. Very well. Please, approach the podium. I walked to the front of the courtroom with measured, deliberate steps, feeling every eye in the room on me. When I reached the podium, I adjusted my tie and looked directly at Veronica. Your Honor, 6 months ago, this woman looked me in the eye and called me useless baggage. She laughed at what she perceived as my humiliation, never realizing that in that moment she was sealing her own fate. Veronica's face crumpled, but I continued without a shred of mercy. For 3 years, she stole from the company my wife and I built together from nothing. She betrayed my son's trust. She violated her marriage vows, and she showed nothing but contempt for the family that had welcomed her. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle in the room. But her greatest crime was not the theft, Your Honor. It was her arrogance. The arrogance to believe that she could mock, steal, and betray without ever facing any consequences. The arrogance to think that being young and beautiful made her untouchable. I looked at Veronica again, and she was sobbing openly now. I do not want this court's mercy for her, Your Honor. I want justice. Complete, uncompromising justice. When I returned to my seat, the courtroom was absolutely silent. Judge Harrison reviewed his notes for a long moment before speaking. Ms. Veronica Sinclair, I sentence you to 7 years in the state penitentiary, to be followed by 5 years of supervised probation. You will also be required to make full restitution to Sinclair Industries in the amount of $412,000, plus interest and penalties. The gavel fell with a resounding crack of finality. Veronica collapsed into her chair, wailing like a wounded animal. The bailiffs moved to escort her out of the courtroom. As they passed my row, she looked at me with an expression of pure hatred. This isn't over, she hissed. When you get out, I said calmly, you will be a 41-year-old ex-convict with no money, no prospects, and no one who cares what happens to you. I, on the other hand, will still be living in luxury, running my company, and enjoying every single day of my life. She tried to lunge at me then, but the bailiffs restrained her and dragged her from the courtroom, still screaming threats and curses. I remained seated until the room had cleared. Then I gathered my briefcase and walked out into the bright afternoon sunshine. On the courthouse steps, a throng of reporters was waiting with their cameras and microphones. "Mr. Sinclair, how do you feel about the sentence?" one of them shouted. "Justice has been served," I said simply. "My company, my employees, and my family can finally move forward." "Do you have any message for other business owners who might be dealing with internal theft?" "Trust, but verify," I said, adjusting my tie. "And never let anyone convince you that you are too old, too quiet, or too useless to fight for what is rightfully yours." That night, I celebrated with a glass of champagne on my terrace, watching the sun set over the Chicago skyline. Isabella's photograph sat on the table beside me, and I raised my glass in a silent toast to her memory. "Two down, my love," I whispered. "Now, for our son." Julian finally hit rock bottom on a Tuesday morning in March when I found him sleeping in his car in the Sinclair Industries parking lot. I discovered him during my morning walk around the building's perimeter, a routine I had adopted after taking full control of the company. He was slumped in the front seat of a 15-year-old Honda, unshaven and wearing the same clothes he'd had on 3 days earlier. I tapped on the window with the end of my cane. He jerked awake, confused and disoriented. It took him several seconds to recognize me. "Dad?" His voice was barely audible through the glass. "Get out of the car, Julian." He struggled with the door handle, his movements clumsy and uncertain. When he finally managed to stand up, I could smell the sour stench of alcohol on him from 3 feet away. "What are you doing here?" I asked. He rubbed his face with both hands, trying to pull himself together. "I didn't have anywhere else to go." "What do you mean?" "The apartment. They evicted me yesterday. I couldn't make the rent." I studied my son, this broken man who had once so confidently claimed his inheritance. His expensive suits had been replaced by stained, thrift store clothes. His perfectly coiffed hair was now greasy and unkempt. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by the hunched shoulders of utter defeat. "Where have you been living?" "The car, mostly. Sometimes I can scrape together enough cash for a motel room, but..." He shrugged helplessly. "What about work? I thought you found a construction job." "I did for about 3 weeks. Then they found out who I was, about the scandal, and they let me go. Said they couldn't have someone with my reputation issues representing their company." I felt a flicker of something that might have been sympathy, but I quickly suppressed it. Julian had made his choices, and now he was living with the consequences. "Have you been drinking?" He nodded miserably. "It helps me sleep. It's 9 o'clock in the morning, Julian. I know what time it is." I considered my options. I could walk away, let him continue his downward spiral into complete self-destruction. Part of me, the part that still stung from his betrayal at the will reading, wanted to do exactly that. But Isabella wouldn't have wanted that. Despite everything, Julian was still our son. "Get in the building," I said. "There's a shower in the executive washroom. Clean yourself up." "Dad, I don't need." "You smell like a garbage can. Your clothes are filthy, and you look like you haven't had a proper meal in days. Get in the building." He followed me through the lobby, past the receptionist who tried her best not to stare, and into the elevator. I used my key card to access the executive floor and led him to the private washroom Isabella had installed years earlier. "There are clean towels in the cabinet," I said. "I'll have my secretary bring you some clothes from the lost and found." While he showered, I sat in my office and made a few phone calls. By the time Julian emerged, clean but still hollow-eyed, I had assembled a small care package: a sandwich from the deli downstairs, a bottle of water, and a small envelope. "Sit down," I said, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. He sat and immediately began devouring the sandwich as if he hadn't eaten in days, which I realized was probably the case. "Jonathan," I said, once he had finished eating, "look at me." He raised his eyes reluctantly, and I saw a mixture of shame and resignation, and perhaps a faint glimmer of hope. "This has to stop," I said quietly. "I know. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're determined to drink yourself to death in a parking lot. What do you want me to say, Dad? That I'm sorry? I've said it 100 times. That I was wrong? I know I was wrong. That I deserve everything that's happened to me? I probably do. What I want," I said, sliding the envelope across the desk, "is for you to decide whether you are going to be a man or a victim." He opened the envelope and found a cashier's check for $5,000. "Dad, I can't." "It's not a gift," I interrupted. "It's a loan. You will pay back every single penny, with interest." "Why are you doing this?" I thought about that question, really considered it. Why was I helping the son who had laughed at my humiliation, who had planned to banish me to a retirement home, who had stood by idly while his wife stole from our company? "Because," I said finally, "your mother loved you, and despite everything you have done, I love you too." Tears began to stream down his cheeks. "I don't deserve." "No, you don't. But love isn't about what we deserve. It's about what we choose to give." I leaned forward, my voice becoming as hard as steel. "But this is your last chance, Julian. The absolute last one. If you waste this money on alcohol, if you end up back in that parking lot, if you make me regret showing you this mercy, then you are dead to me. Do you understand?" He nodded, still crying. "There is a construction company in Austin that is looking for project managers. The owner owes me a favor. You'll start at the bottom, earning a fraction of what you used to make, but it's honest work. Austin, a fresh start, a new city where your reputation won't follow you. But you will be alone, Julian. No family money to fall back on. No connections to smooth your way. Just you and your choices." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "What if I fail?" "Then you fail. But you will fail as a man who tried, not as a drunk sleeping in parking lots." 3 days later, I drove him to the airport. He carried a single suitcase and the cashier's check, along with the phone number of his new employer. "Dad," he said at the departure gate, "I want you to know." "Don't," I interrupted. "Don't make promises or speeches. Just be better than you were." He nodded and walked toward his gate without looking back. 6 months later, I received a letter from Austin. Julian was working as a junior project manager, living in a modest apartment and attending AA meetings twice a week. He had enclosed a money order for $500, his first payment toward the loan. I put the money order in my desk drawer and returned to my work. Redemption, I was learning, was a process, not a single event. But at least it was a beginning. 2 years had passed since Veronica's sentencing when she was released on parole for good behavior. I learned about it the same way I learned about most things these days, through my network of contacts who kept me informed about anything that might affect my interests. She had served 5 years of her 7-year sentence, and according to my sources, prison had not been kind to her. The beautiful, polished socialite who had once mocked me was now a gaunt, hard-eyed woman with prematurely gray hair and the kind of nervous energy that comes from constant vigilance. I was in my office reviewing quarterly reports when my secretary buzzed in with an urgent call. "Mr. Sinclair, it's Detective Miller from Financial Crimes. She says it's important." I took the call immediately. "Detective, what can I do for you?" "Mr. Sinclair, I wanted to give you a heads up. Veronica Sinclair was released yesterday, and we have reason to believe she might try to contact you." "What kind of reason?" "She's been making threats. Nothing specific enough to violate her parole, but she blames you for her incarceration. Her parole officer is concerned she might try to retaliate." I adjusted my tie thoughtfully. "I see. What do you recommend?" "Extra security for a while. Vary your routine. Be aware of your surroundings. After I hung up, I sat quietly in my office, considering this new development. Veronica was free, angry, and likely desperate. She had lost everything. Her husband, her freedom, her reputation, her comfortable life. Prison had likely only intensified her hatred for me. I wasn't afraid of her. I was curious to see what she might try. The answer came 3 weeks later. I was leaving the office late one evening when I noticed a familiar figure lurking in the parking garage. Veronica stepped out from behind a concrete pillar, and I was shocked by how much she had changed. Prison had aged her decades, carving deep lines of bitterness around her eyes and mouth. "Hello, Henry," she said, her voice raspy from years of cheap cigarettes. "Veronica." I kept walking toward my car, my keys ready in my hand. "Congratulations on your release." 5 years, she said, falling into step beside me. 5 years of my life because of you. 5 years because you chose to steal from my company and commit fraud. I corrected. "Your choices, your consequences." She laughed, a harsh grating sound that echoed off the garage walls. "You think you're so smart, don't you? So untouchable. I think I'm a man who built something and protected it from people who tried to destroy it. You destroyed my marriage. Your affair with Keith destroyed your marriage. I just made sure Julian found out about it." We had reached my car now. I discreetly pressed the panic button on my key fob, not enough to trigger the car alarm, but just enough to activate the silent notification to my security company. "You want to know something funny?" Veronica said, moving closer. "I've had 5 years to think about this. 5 years to plan exactly how I'm going to make you pay. And what brilliant scheme have you devised?" She smiled, and it was an ugly, malicious expression. "I'm going to take everything from you, just like you took everything from me. Your company, your reputation, your precious little life." "How?" "I've been talking to some very interesting people. People who remember how Isabella really built her fortune. People who know about the corners she cut, the bribes she paid, the safety violations she covered up." My blood ran cold, but I kept my expression neutral. "Isabella built this company with integrity and honest work." "Did she?" Veronica pulled a manila envelope from her jacket. "Because I have documents that say otherwise. Photos, receipts, testimony from workers who were there." I recognized the envelope, the same type my private investigator had used, to deliver the evidence of her crimes. "What do you want?" "I want you to sign over controlling interest in Sinclair Industries to me. I want a public apology for what you did, and I want $10 million. And if I refuse, then these documents go to every newspaper, every television station, and every regulatory agency in the state. Your precious wife's reputation will be destroyed. Your company will be worthless, and you will spend your final years fighting off criminal charges." I studied her face, searching for any tell, any sign of deception. She was nervous but confident, utterly convinced she finally held the winning hand. "Show me," I said. She opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of photographs and documents that looked like official reports. I examined them carefully, my heart sinking as I recognized locations, dates, and people. They were forgeries. Excellent forgeries, but fakes nonetheless. I could see the subtle signs, inconsistent fonts, paper that was too new, digital artifacts where documents had been altered, but they were convincing enough to cause catastrophic damage if released to the media. "Impressive," I said, handing them back. "How much did this cost you?" "Every penny I could scrape together, plus a few favors I called in from my prison contacts. But it was worth it to see the look on your face. And you think I'll just hand over my life's work because of some forged documents? I think you'll do whatever it takes to protect Isabella's memory. She was right about that, at least. Isabella's reputation meant everything to me. More than money, more than power, more than my own life. But I hadn't survived 64 years by being easily intimidated. "I'll need time to consider your offer," I said. "You have 24 hours. Meet me tomorrow night at the old warehouse on Industrial Boulevard. Midnight. Come alone and bring the paperwork transferring your shares to me." After she left, I sat in my car for a long time, thinking. Then I made a series of phone calls. The game wasn't over yet. The warehouse on Industrial Boulevard had been abandoned for years. Its broken windows and rust-stained walls made it the perfect setting for Veronica's dramatic finale. I arrived at 11:45, carrying a briefcase and wearing my best black suit with my late wife's pearl cufflinks. If this was going to be my final performance, I intended to look impeccable. Veronica was already there, pacing nervously in the dim light that filtered through the broken skylights. She had dressed for the occasion, 2 black jeans and a dark jacket, as if she were planning a heist instead of a business meeting. "You came?" she said, relief evident in her voice. "Did you think I wouldn't? I thought you might try to call the police and have them see those documents you've so carefully prepared," I said. "I don't think so," she smiled triumphantly. "So, you'll sign the papers?" I brought them. I set the briefcase on a dusty crate that stood between us. Transfer documents, resignation letters, everything you asked for. And the apology, written and notarized. The money, a cashier's check for $10 million. Veronica's eyes gleamed with greed and satisfaction. "Open the case." I clicked the latches and lifted the lid, revealing neat stacks of legal documents. She snatched up the top sheet, the share transfer agreement, and scanned it eagerly. "This looks right," she said. "Sign it." I pulled out an expensive gold pen, a gift from Isabella on our 20th anniversary, and prepared to sign away everything we had built together. "Wait," I said, pausing with the pen hovering above the paper. "I have one question." "What?" "How did you really get those documents? The truth this time." She laughed, drunk on her impending victory. "A friend of mine from prison. She specializes in high-quality document forgery. Cost me everything I had, but she's an artist, so they're fake." "Of course they're fake. But they're good enough to fool the media, and that's all that matters." I smiled and set down the pen. "Thank you for confirming that." "What do you mean?" Suddenly, the warehouse lights blazed to life, flooding the vast space with brilliant illumination. Veronica spun around in shock as figures emerged from the shadows. Detective Miller, FBI agents, my private investigator, and a team of federal marshals. "Veronica Sinclair," Detective Miller announced. "You are under arrest for extortion, fraud, and violation of your parole terms." Veronica's face turned white with shock and rage. "No, this isn't possible." "What isn't possible?" I said, closing my briefcase. "That you thought you could outsmart me twice?" As the agents moved in to restrain her, Veronica screamed at me from across the warehouse floor. "You set me up!" "Just like you tried to set me up," I replied. "The difference is, I actually succeeded. Those documents will make excellent evidence at your trial, along with the recording of you admitting their forgeries and detailing your extortion attempt." I held up a small digital recorder that had been concealed in my tie clip. "Technology is a wonderful thing, don't you think?" They dragged her away, still screaming threats and curses, her voice echoing off the warehouse walls until it faded into the night. Detective Miller approached me as I gathered my things. "Nice work, Mr. Sinclair. She violated her parole the minute she tried to extort you. How long will she get this time? With her prior record and the parole violation? Probably 15 to 20 years. She won't be bothering you again." 6 months later, I sat in my office reviewing the latest quarterly reports. Sinclair Industries was thriving. We had just landed the biggest contract in the company's history, and our reputation in the business community had never been stronger. My secretary buzzed in. "Mr. Sinclair, your son is on line 1. I picked up the phone with a feeling of genuine pleasure. "Julian, how are things in Austin?" "Good, Dad. Really good. I got promoted to senior project manager, and I've been sober for 18 months now. I'm proud of you. I wanted to let you know I sent another payment toward the loan. Should have it completely paid off by Christmas." "That's wonderful." There was a pause, and then, "Dad, I was wondering, would it be okay if I came home for Christmas? I know I don't deserve—" "You deserve whatever you have earned," I interrupted. "And from what I can see, you've earned a second chance." I could hear the relief and gratitude in his voice when he thanked me before hanging up. That evening I sat on my terrace with a glass of Isabella's favorite wine, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Her photograph sat on the table beside me, and I raised my glass in a silent toast. "Mission accomplished, my love," I whispered to her memory. "Our son is becoming the man you always hoped he could be. Veronica will spend the rest of her prime years in prison, and I am exactly where I belong." The wooden box sat on my desk inside, empty now of its life-changing contents, but still precious to me as a symbol of everything I had reclaimed and protected. Isabella had left me more than just share certificates in that box. She had left me power, purpose, and the definitive proof that I was never the useless old baggage my enemies believed I was. I was Henry Sinclair. I had built an empire, vanquished my enemies, and saved my son from his own worst instincts. The king was firmly seated on his throne, and no one would ever move me from it again. As the stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky, I smiled and sipped my wine. Justice, I had learned, was indeed best served cold. But victory was sweetest when savored slowly, one perfect moment at a time. If this story of triumph over betrayal resonated with you, I hope you'll take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It's stories like these that remind us it's never too late to reclaim our power and show the world who we truly are. Sometimes the greatest comebacks begin after the darkest chapters. Thank you for listening.